That will depend the survival of Christian civilization. Upon it depends our own British life and the long continuity of our institutions and our empire. So, glory and might of the enemy must then soon return on us. But I know that we will have to break up Indian Island or we will go on. If we can stand up to him, all Europe may be free, and the life of the world may move forward.
Appropriately now, we see rolling 4 Hawker Hurricanes, Fighter Command's most numerous type during the summer of 1940. Went on to claim 5 kills with number 19 Squadron. During Dunkirk and the Battle of Britain, he would be awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. And here here as the Mk./A Spitfire breaks away from the...
I mean, apart from anything else, with 100 miles an hour train, there was that, but it was a totally different sort of machine. I must admit, I didn't terribly like the Spitfire to begin with, but then I had a reason not to, because the first flight I ever did in one, I turned it upside down on the aerodrome landing, and I thought it gave me an inborn fear of it. It took me quite a while hours to get over that. But a lot of other people, like James Card, were doing twisters and things like that with the aerodrome. The first flight, it took me better.
And the pilot officer was killed.
The CO that George mentioned there, the commanding officer, was Squadron Leader Jeffrey Stevenson, flying what turned out after World War II only to lose his life in a test flying accident in the United States.
The roar of the Merlin. And of course, with the Griffin here, there is a distinct difference to that howl, isn't there? And it's interesting also that the Mk.I, the original, were all to do with keeping pace and keeping ahead of what opposition you were likely to face. And if you had those kind of, if you had that information ingrained in you, you could use each of those things to your advantage, which indeed they, thank God, did.
Through World War II and beyond.
Into the jet age, of course.
Yes, indeed, because jet-engined fighters were very well established by the time the final Spitfires were removed from active duty RAF charge. But there we see the earliest of the trio touching down the IWM Mk./A, N3200, the Dunkirk veteran for one sortie, which was from Aero Legends at Headcorn. Charlie Brown flying that for us today, and the Griffin-engined clipped wing for better low-altitude performance. FR-14E from Anglia Aircraft Restorations was flown by Battle of Britain in RAF Fighter Command. 4 to have completed its maiden post-restoration flight, having done so in 2018. Then we have P3717, owned by Jennifer Taylor, operating 40 as part of our BBMF Spitfire duo. It's the Mk.2A, serial P7350.
Well, I'll go up there then. So now it's just deciding actually what. Yeah, I think it's scrappy tips. I guess I don't think I was going to say I'll be as quick as I can, but meh.
goes, that next Spitfire, a Mark 9, but a very different one. Bailed out successfully. This one crash landed in a forest near Murmansk, and there it lay until recovery in the 1990s. And here it is now, fully restored. Iraqi Spitfire, so as to have an airworthy example that much more rapidly, but all the time he was harvesting original parts from the wreckage, the very complete wreckage of this airframe for reuse when the restoration recommenced in earnest. To be seen to be believed. It has the correct Merlin 66 engine for this variant. The paint job, helped by there being so much original paint on the aircraft when it was discovered near Murmansk, is entirely accurate. Teichmann and his team were loaned the correct type of 250-pound general purpose bomb from the Royal Air Force Museum at Duxford to make replicas. Hawks like this, shooting down two Messerschmitt Bf-109s on the 8th of September 1939. And while the Americans had considered it obsolete before World War II, this was probably the best fighter the French had around the time of the German invasion. 7 Hawk 75 pilots in the Armée de l'Air, and we'll look out now to the left are 2 Curtiss fighters, the Hawk 75A1 and the P-40F Warhawk. And these are both 1940. Wasn't the end of the story for those aeroplanes. And this area, after the armistice with Germany in June 1940, then back to the Free French once again. Whenever it flies, we see what an absolutely superb performer it is for an early war fighter. Family that followed it, but with, according to Stephen Gray, the boss of the fighter collection, more balanced handling and lighter stick forces. And here we see the P-40F running in. A rather unusual member of the P-40 family because, as I said, it's fitted with a Merlin engine. We think of RAF Warhawks and Kitty Hawks with the shark's mouth markings on the nose. As used by number 112 Squadron in the Middle East and North Africa as fighters and ground attack aircraft. The Soviets used large numbers of them. Manufacturer of Packard. But still Merlins were in short supply, not least due to supplies of Packard Merlins for Mustangs and Spitfires. Motorway comes the P-40F. And touching down very nicely on the grass. We now see on the spectacular second display. Section on display. Getting airborne now, the Boeing B-17G Flying Fortress, named Sally B. Made a number of appearances on the 2021 display circuit. I think this one would have been its 45th anniversary season last year. It's the only B-17 still operational in Europe, and it acts as a flying memorial of the US 8th Air Force stationed here in East Anglia. Here she comes.
And as you can clearly see on that flyby, that daylight bombing operation was immense. Incidentally, the first mission by the American Air Force during the Second World War was on a raid into continental Europe. It was actually led by Paul Tibbets, who would become famous as
42, because at that point Spitfires were all there were to escort them, and they were relatively short-ranged, and it took the P-47s and the P-51s, which we're shortly to see, to provide that longer-range escort facility that was so crucial.
Absolutely. The arrival of the Mustang in particular changed the whole dynamic of the air war in Europe. because they could escort the B-17s and the B-24s in and out of Germany.
Our Buchons get into the air underneath.
Ball bearing plants in Schweinfurt, where they suffered such huge losses, the whole plan of daylight bombing became unsustainable.
Yes, 77 B-17s were lost on that mission alone. But as we say later on, with the more suitable escort fighters, and keep this aircraft flying and support what is a very expensive operation. Thank you to all of you, and this pass with smoke on, simulating 2 damaged engines, pays due tribute.
Often think about the motorists on the M11 coming up and seeing Sally B land. Must be fantastic.
So there, Andrew Dixon and Paul Schluer touching down in the B-17. We're delighted to announce that yesterday the aircraft flew with a newly fledged captain in the hot seat for the first time, John Corley, and we look forward to seeing him displaying the aircraft for us next season.
Fantastic. And a lovely rollout with the tail.
And scrambling underneath them, the P-47 and the P-51s. That were being operated by the Luftwaffe as World War II played. Models, one of them a 2-seat TF-51D, and here they come indeed, P-47 and 2 Mustangs. The Buchons getting in behind the 3 American fighters. the thick of it. Some years ago, 4 veterans of the Duxford-based group, nicknamed the Duxford Eagles,
and of course everybody wanted them to come up so everybody wanted to shoot down an airplane.
They would stay away until we had to turn for home with the 47. Because they knew that we had a limit on the range as far as gas movements up and stuff. And they just clobbered all the bombs like we left. When the P-51 was brought in, it made all the difference in the world because we surprised that we didn't turn around and go home. We stayed there and fought them.
A dogfight usually consisted of...
Tom to fly 67 combat sorties in P-47s and P-51s. In fact, the Mustang today exhibited in our American Air Museum here is painted in his colours. Speaking in 2014, he recalled his first ever encounter.
I looked back and here was an ME-109 firing at me. I could see the flashes of the guns. So I immediately called point right and I looked around, get on his tail, and he dropped his gear and flaps. And of course, that was like 109 that was flying. So we attacked him. He was going so fast he didn't get the tail. You learn a lot. You learn a lot with every mission first.
A type that weighs some 7 tons, more than some of the light bombers and strike aircraft of the period that were multi-engined. But nonetheless, by all accounts, an exceptionally sweet-handling fighter, another very stable, safe gun platform, and so outstanding in the air-to-ground as well as the air-to-air role.
And the 38th
of the air fighting development unit stationed here before the Americans came in. This was an RAF unit who got speaking to his friend Ronnie Harker, the chief test pilot of Rolls-Royce, one day. They both agreed that fitting the Merlin engine to the hitherto Allison-engined Mustang would be a huge improvement in terms of high altitude performance, because the Allison Mustang was a superb low-level aircraft. That should never be forgotten. And or escort fighter that it became, and that we saw represented here in this sequence by the Mustangs of Anglia Aircraft Restorations, the 2-seater in the 78th Fighter Group markings, and of Robert Tyrrell, and with the name Nellie B, stationed at Ibsley in Hampshire until it moved to France in the aftermath of D-Day in June 1944. Marvellous sequence that by all of the pilots concerned, whether Allied or Axis in this case. We regularly see the Buchon's
It's the western end of the trading area to find out more about that. And that website is planestv.com/Duxford.
Also a reminder, while our next display item readies itself for takeoff down the eastern end of the airfield, all the benefits that brings. Thank you indeed to all the IWM members who are here at the display today. IWM is of course a charity dependent on its members to enable the stories it tells to continue to be recalled. If you're not already a member, please visit the team display of the day. This as we continue to celebrate the 85th anniversary of the Spitfire, and you can find a lot more information here right around the site, and maybe you might like to come back on another day to experience in quieter circumstances all of those aspects of IWM Duxford, notably those relating to the historic Duxford exhibition. The exhibition space for that can be found just behind the control tower here. In time now more than 100 years to the battlefields of the First World War and the 2021 presentation by the Great War display team. The two, or rather, Yes, indeed, the two Royal Aircraft Factory SE-5A scale replicas getting into the air, followed by the replica Mk CL1. These are all replica aircraft, in fact. Then we have the Sopwith triplane and the two Fokker DR1s, the Dreideckers, the German triplanes. And perhaps the German aircraft most emblematic of the First World War, although built in very small numbers, which we'll come on to. Aerial warfare, don't forget, was a relatively new practice by the time of the 1914 to 18. British and German aeroplanes about to split asunder and into combat against one another. We've got one SE-5A up above with the Mk CL1, which already is trailing smoke. Off to our left, we've got the two triplanes, and the other Fokker triplane is engaged, the other SE-5A, out to our left. Fokker triplane in from the left. Very close up behind its Sopwith counterpart, which has taken a hit. The Mk CL1 already smoking with one SE-5A behind it, and there's the other SE-5A followed by the second Dreidecker. Now, we talk about fighter aircraft of the First World War. That term wasn't really in use by the British. We called them scouts. And in the case of the SE-5A, SE likes of Albert Ball, Mick Mannock, James McCudden and Billy Bishop, all flew SE-5As. These are 7/8 scale replicas. Now in reality, the dogfights of the First World War would have involved generally many more aircraft than this, dozens of them, in extremely close entailed. Nothing like that during the Great War. Aircraft would constantly be circling, climbing, diving, accelerating, slowing, just to get onto their opponent's tails. And when we say that, we mean right close onto them, using the rudder to make turns. Its rates of climb and turn were better than its enemy contemporaries. The triplane started to be replaced by the Sopwith Camel in the summer of 1917, but the famous Black Flight of number 10 Naval Squadron scored 87 kills in 3 months with Sopwith triplanes. It's one of those aircraft you can see there, just coming past the control tower now with its Fokker contemporary right on its tail. And we were talking about that to be such a good performer. But even though the Fokker DR1 is today so emblematic of the Imperial German Air Service during the First.
Of course, one of the great innovations during this period was the use of the interrupter gear.
Ah, yes.
Such that to reduce the or remove the object that blocked the gear. I wouldn't fancy doing that myself.
Definitely not. The Sopwith and Fokker triplanes passed us again. Of course, some very famous pilots flew the Dreidecker, the likes of Manfred von Richthofen, even, as we were saying earlier, see Paul Ford's replica Dreidecker.
I think the ground forces have got the bit between their teeth now.
I think so. I'm also amazed at the performance of the monoplane at the back, the only monoplane in the display, the Mk CL1, which has been smoking throughout this display, clearly took a hit very early on in the engagement and has carried on. So the sounding of the last post bringing this display. And so, flying for you today, we had Dave Linney and Matthew Boddington in the two SE-5As, Gordon Brander, the team leader, in the Sopwith triplane, Peter Bond and Mike Collett in the Fokker triplanes.
A little ahead of schedule, it just gives us a chance to remind you that Plains TV is live.
HU5, and then the Western Whirlwind, HAR10. I'm sure very familiar to you if you lived in East Anglia for a long time, because search and rescue flights of numbers 22 and 202 squadrons, long stationed in these parts on all rescue Wessex were retired in the 1990s, 6 HAR3A models, and it was those we used to see here with 22 Squadron from Wattisham, were ordered to replace the last of those Wessex. So there's the Seeking with the Wessex and the Whirlwind in trail. And up and out of that fly past breaks the Wessex. First West with gas turbine power. It gave the Royal Navy's anti-submarine warfare helicopter force much better capabilities in the night and all-weather spheres than it had had before, with its bigger payload and all-round superior performance to the Whirlwind. The HS1 model gave way to the Mk.III in Royal Navy service from 1967. But by then, the RAF was operating the type as the Wessex HC2, much improved with twin-coupled Rolls-Royce Gnome engines. It was ordered as a general-purpose transport, which could also operate in the ground assault role with anti-tank missiles and machine guns, and able to... The HU5 model we see on display here was developed as a twin-engined version for the Royal Navy, operating in the Royal Marines commando support role, flying from assault ships. They flew in significant numbers during the Falklands campaign, deploying members of both the SAS, the Special Air Service, and the SBS, the Special Boat Service, moving men and material around after 10,000 hours had been spent on its restoration.
Sorry.
Was just ready in time for the 2019 RNAS Yeovilton International Air Day. And as you may have seen in the TV series Warbird Workshop, it made its post-restoration debut. Now here's a nice sight. Look at the Wessex hovering at Crowd Centre, the Seeking and the Whirlwind passing overhead. Coordinated display there, the Wessex, equipped with a winch and a scoop net to rescue survivors. And detachments were set up around the UK. There were several other versions for both the Navy and the RAF. RAF variant with the Gnome turboshaft engine. Number 22 Squadron had its whirlwinds replaced by Wessex. Number 202 Squadron was its last RAF operator in the air sea rescue role, and the Sea King started arriving from 1978. The last ones in service overall were with the search and rescue train. In 71 it went up to Lucas in Fife, the following year to Coltishall in Norfolk, and 2 years later to Chivenor in Devon, and it was with the Search and Rescue Training Unit at Finningley in Yorkshire until its retirement in 1981. Whitehouse bought the aircraft as the founding member of the historic helicopters fleet in 2013. It then had an expired certificate of airworthiness. It was brought back to flying condition and started appearing at events again from 2014. Absolutely marvellous, characterful machines, all of these. Sideways down the line, the last of the trio to display about to go into its solo performance. It is, of course, the Sea King HAR3. As I said, 2 squadrons of Sea Kings, numbers 22 and 202, operated from detachments around the UK with Sea Kings. They provided 24-hour search and rescue cover at 15-minute readiness in daylight, 45-minute readiness by night. And they form part of a nationwide search and rescue service. Which, apart from the RAF Sea Kings, included Royal Navy ones, and Sikorsky F-61 helicopters, close relatives of course of the Sea King, operated on behalf of HM Coast Guard. Also part of that service, the 4 RAF mounted rescue teams, and it was all coordinated. Service, the search and rescue Sea Kings would expect upwards of 1,000 call-outs a year, and that's to say nothing of the Navy and Coast Guard helicopters that augmented them. This one, built in 1978, delivered to the RAF that year. It spent time in the South Atlantic serving with number 78 Squadron, the RAF Sea King unit out there in the Falklands, along with the operational units in the UK, numbers 22 and 202 squadrons, number 203 Squadron, the operational conversion unit. It was withdrawn in January 2016 and put up for disposal. Historic Helicopters acquired it and moved it to their base at Chard, and it flew for the first time in civilian hands on the 20th of March 2020, and just over a year later, in April this year, they've added a second of these crow's nest equipped derivatives of the Leonardo Merlin helicopter. also other ex-military Sea Kings still in operation for training purposes with heli operations. So the type's still well represented in British skies. Coming together at display centre. What a sight! Display by historic helicopters. Former Chief Rotary Wing Instructor of the Empire Test Pilot School, Steve Daniels, leading it in the Sea King, followed by ex-Army Air Corps Apache Instructor and Display Pilot Jim Traherne with the Wessex, and the collection founder Andrew Whitehouse with the Whirlwind. But now we're going to see some more of British military rotary wing aviation. George Bacon is with me to tell you all about it. George.
Well, good afternoon. Synonymous with the development and the opening of the Arctic regions in North America. The Beaver is just one of the ultimate utility aircraft and a real pleasure to fly. Although I'm not flying it myself today, it is actually 40 years today that I first flew Mk.20. The aircraft itself 60 years old this month as well, so it's a tremendous achievement that these aircraft are still huge. A Royal Artillery officer, and his association, having got a first pilot's license in France, then decided to demonstrate, using a Bristol box kite, the ability of a military pilot doing reconnaissance over the exercises on Salisbury Plain in that particular year. It was in September, and two critical people were observing those exercises. A young Winston Churchill and, of course, Lord Kitchener behind everything. And that day he convinced them of the power of this sort of aircraft. Now today, all the Army aircraft, despite their digital technology, still do very much the same job as was initiated in those days, and that is all about looking over the hill to get the advantage over the enemy with its Nimbus turbine engine, the only turbine that we operate in the historic Army aircraft flight. To a certain extent, what you're seeing is some of the observation patrols that would have been undertaken by the fixed wing, but the reconnaissance in airborne rebroadcast to the troops on the ground. But here, taking the centre stage in an AOP turn, as we refer to it, at the Air Observation Post, really it was essentially 1941, but very much in 42, when the Osters were brought into 651 Squadron, once again by the Royal Artillery, flown by those pilots, but under Royal Air Force designated squadrons. But they did an extraordinary work in aircraft that virtually had very little help for it. Totally comes the command aircraft for the entire fleet of aircraft we operate. Flying that one today is Juliet Hickman. All our pilots are volunteers. One or two happen to be serving reservists, but generally speaking, the entire outfit now, all these aircraft now run by a volunteer group as a charity, as the military no longer supports them with financial assistance. behind in the Oster, we have Paul McNulty. Again, all ex-Army Air Corps pilots, all with operational experience. And those two aircraft very, very neatly. Then the Oster Mk.IX again had twice the power, albeit only 210 horsepower compared to the barely 100 horsepower of the Cirrus Minor, which powered the very early Mk.Is in 1941 and 1942. As they come back round now for a final positioning maneuver, high up in the rotary machines above, in the Sioux Bell 47 today, we've got Rich Pillans, again, ex-Apache fleet operational pilot and test pilot with the military, now working for Boeing, and again giving up his free time to volunteer to fly these for you today. And then bringing up the rear, Paul Stanton, again, a hugely experienced operational scout pilot, and now volunteering pretty much full time with us, doing a number of information there. And you can see here with the different power curves, one or two will be screaming and saying, we need more speed up, whereas others, particularly the Sioux, very challenging helicopter fly, will be high Arctic on the skis is second to none in its flexibility and adaptability, powered by the marvellous rasping sound of the Pratt & Whitney 9-cylinder R985. And when you put all the levers fully forward in that, you may have heard it on other aircraft here today, the tips virtually go supersonic, and that of course is the marvellous roar that you get. The Sioux chasing down the Oster now, and the Beaver just repositioning as a result of the main runway there already being occupied for a next departure, and we'll just pause for a moment while they sort that out, but nonetheless, actually